You fool! Warren is...
Thrill me. Yeah, all right. He's dead.
The thing in the hole was a man, or had been. He was dressed in nondescript brown jacket, shirt and trousers, shoes, and his skin had something of the color of earth too, and there was earth coming from his nostrils and his ears, and at the corner of his mouth. His eyes were opened, staring upward, for he was lying on his back. As Holland knelt beside the thing, he noticed the quirk of the lips. The man, whoever he was, could not have been very pretty in life, and the leer turned the face into a distasteful grimace.
I was talking to a friend the other day about scary stories, naturally. Specifically the types of stories that I select for recording here at HorrorBabble. And he asked me a pretty obvious question, one that I haven't heard as often as you might think. Simply put, what's the scariest story you've ever recorded? Well, it stumped me because I hadn't really thought about it before, believe it or not. I mean, I've recorded hundreds of stories over the years now. Quite a few that have appeared on those lists that you see from time to time. Scariest stories of all time and the most disturbing works ever written, etc. So it'd be easy to proffer up something by Lovecraft or Clark Ashton Smith. Something classic and well-known, but that'd be too obvious, wouldn't it? And not necessarily true either. So I thought about it a bit, and one story in particular kept nudging for attention. And it's a story by the American author Allison V. Harding, real name Jean Milligan, a regular Weird Tales contributor throughout the 1940s and 50s. Now, for those who might not know much about Weird Tales, the golden age of Weird Tales started in the late 1920s and ended in the late 30s, with the likes of The Call of Cthulhu and Robert E. Howard's Conan stories taking centre stage. So Harding's contributions, which arrived a little later, have been largely forgotten about over the years, which is a shame, really, because there are some highly original and memorable stories among the 36 she penned for the magazine. But the story I'll be talking about today is one of the last she ever wrote. And it goes by the rather ambiguous title, The Underbody. Quick note, there'll be some minor spoilers ahead. The Underbody, which was published in the November 1949 edition of Weird Tales, saw the introduction of what I consider to be one of the most unusual and terrifying beings ever to grace the ragged pages of the magazine. An entity by the rather innocuous name of Mr. Mole.
The doctor reached for the wrist. As he lifted it to feel at the pulse, earth fell away from between the fingers. It was as he expected, no beat. He slipped a hand in under the man's jacket and felt over the heart region. There was not the slightest vibration. He rose, and herding his son before him, hurried back to the house. "You see, Daddy, I told you about Mr. Mole. He comes out of the earth."
In terms of plot, the story concerns a doctor by the name of Albert Holland, whose young son, Jamie, is repeatedly visited by the aforementioned Mr. Mole, a being that seems, at least in the eyes of the adults, to take the form of a dead man. And so we follow Albert and his son as the former strives to protect the latter from what he perceives to be a rather strange and forbidding threat. What is Mr. Mole, exactly? And what does it want with the child? The whole thing gets under my skin. The idea of a clothed man dragging his bulk through the filthy soil, burrowing after the fashion of the small animal from which he gets his name, is nothing short of loathsome. The fact that the adults see it too further adds to this sense of dread. The doctor can't deny what his son is telling him, which I think inhibits the fearlessness that a parent is supposed to portray when some unfamiliar peril menaces their offspring. And in general, I think there's something very unsettling about horror stories that revolve around children. The ordinary description of extraordinary things, the trust placed in otherworldly strangers and creatures, and the general inability to comprehend danger. The Underbody is made up of all this and more. There's a really brooding atmosphere, one of doubt and ignorance, and all the while the reader is left to fill in the blanks, to ponder the whereabouts of Mr. Mole, visualizing its animal-like foraging as it searches for would-be victims, specifically children.
I think I saw the fellow move. It was getting kind of to twilight out there. I'd sent Eddie back to the house for a flashlight. To be honest, I couldn't see so good. But Doc, he'd been lying on his back with the earth and all coming out of his mouth like. And when I looked again, I could swear he'd kind of rolled over. But there was still this grin on his face like he'd died smiling. Only it wasn't a nice smile. Or if he wasn't all dead, he was enjoying this.
The doctor knows something's wrong, knows that something horrifying is hurtling towards him and his little boy, but he can't work it out. It's a thing beyond the everyday, beyond the mundane. It's the fear of the unknown, the basis of any effective horror story. There's just enough ambiguity to keep you thinking, keep you asking questions, as we creep slowly towards the conclusion. And it goes without saying that the conclusion is pretty horrifying, but I won't go into that here. I'll provide a link below to our recording of the story, and I'll pop a link on screen too. There are lots of other candidates for Scariest story, but I think these things depend on a variety of factors. At least for me, time of year plays a big part, mood, setting, etc. And of course, this is a subjective opinion based on a question that I hadn't previously pondered. What do you think? Is the Underbody one to keep you awake at night? Or is it just small potatoes? What about Mr. Mole? What is he? Where does he come from? Let me know in the comments. I'll leave you with the following.
There were, Holland was well aware, cases of improper diagnosis. Persons have been declared dead who were not dead. There are diseases and conditions and states which resemble death and yet are not. The catatonic is one, for instance. And yet beneath his reasoning, beyond his speculating and his attempts to lay out at least in his own mind each possibility, and then rationally to plug these loopholes, he was certain as a physician that the man he had seen, the one Jamie had, so aptly, wasn't it, called Mr. Mole, was not of the living.
You've been warned, folks. Beware of Mr. Mole.
If you enjoyed listening today, be sure to subscribe to the channel by hitting the red subscribe button below. After doing so, click the bell icon next to the subscribe button to receive new content notifications. If you'd like to support our work and receive exclusive perks, consider becoming a channel member by clicking the join button below. To support us in other ways, see the video description for links to our Bandcamp and Patreon pages, our merch store over at Teespring, and further information relating to our releases on Audible, iTunes, and Spotify. And until next time,